The global pandemic has caused some working at home workers to become nomads. What should you do when your employee asks to move out of state? What if they ask to move out of the country? Welcome to Employers Corner podcast, a casual conversation about how to navigate the daily challenges in today's workplace. I'm Chelsea Jensen, HR consultant, and today I am here with my colleague, Mark Cicatello, also HR consultant. Welcome, Mark.
Hello, Chelsea.
Mark is an HR consultant at Employers Council here. His areas of expertise are compensation, international HR, HR strategy, performance management, and ethics. Prior to Employers Council, Mark held a variety of HR positions in the pharmaceutical and high-tech industries. He is on the board of directors of the World Trade Center and teaches in the graduate school at the University of Denver. So thanks again for joining us today, Mark, on the
great
podcast
to be here, Chelsea.
for this topic. So I'd have to say over the past year, our team has received so many calls from our member organizations about, what do I do? My employee wants to go work in another state. And we've even had quite a few, conversations with members about employees who want to work in another country. So why is this happening? Why is this a topic right now?
Well, I'll say that it's always been there, but it's been certainly not as many. This pandemic that we're in has really been a disruption. And I think the disruption has really meant that people are now working much more at home. Here at the council, you and I are working from home, right? So I think that has allowed people to start thinking like, maybe home isn't home, but maybe I'm going to go back home, back east, out west, up north, or outside of the country, because I can do it, not necessarily, should I do it? But I think there's an opportunity there for organizations that have never thought about this before. Through my career, when we had people that wanted to work from home, it was like, oh, really? This was like, we had them jump through all sorts of hoops. But now it's just like, yeah, we have broken a barrier here. This disruption has actually been, in many ways, had certainly negative effects. We all know those, but I think it's had some positive effects, and it's allowed this to occur.
So we get this particular question a lot as well. A current Colorado employee wants to go live temporarily in, let's just say, for example, Illinois. So what are some of the considerations an organization needs to think about if they want to allow that employee to do that?
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty common question. We get it quite a bit. And I think you want to know about it as much as you possibly can, because there's a convenience, also a convenience issue, because it's convenient for the employee. It's an employee-friendly thing to do. For the employer, it's a compliance thing. So you can turn a blind eye to a number of things. So what are those things? Those things are, when do taxes kick in? And each state really is different in this regard. So you mentioned Illinois. Well, Illinois happens to have a reciprocal agreement with, I think, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Kentucky, that you can move between those states and it won't be any issue. If you're out of those states, then you have if you're there for more than 30 days, you have to start paying Illinois state taxes. It's different in Utah. Utah, it's a 60-day limit. In Colorado, if somebody comes here, we actually want taxes right away. New York wants their taxes right away, and it's understandable. So it's a bit of a mosaic across the country, and you need to be aware as to what those limits really are. And for the employer, then it's not an easy, but you have to think about, well, if somebody was in Colorado and they're now in, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, do you then stop paying Colorado taxes and pay Pennsylvania taxes, or do they owe both? All this stuff you have to talk to a tax professional about, but I think that's one of the issues. The other issue, too, is more practical, I guess, in a sense, is time zone changes. I have a son who is in the financial services business who deals with clients on the East Coast. His hours now shift by 2 hours. So you have to think, okay, am I going to allow that person to start, earlier on the East Coast or later on the West Coast, or do I want them to keep the hours that they're keeping, here?
Right. And that could be tricky too. If you're in California, for example, and you've got somebody who maybe wants to be in Florida, that's a huge time zone situation. And, if you need them to be available at certain times, that could be tricky.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. I think that's, there's some practical things to it. Again, you have to trade off this convenience for the employee versus complying, because if you're going to start paying state taxes in another state, that's going to require the organization to set up themselves in that state. May not be a big deal, but you got to set up taxes in that state. Do you have to pay unemployment in that state? Do you have to pay workers' compensation in that state? So you have to be mindful of those items. So cool, but it comes with some strings.
Can an employer require that a certain position remain in a certain area or location, even if that position is remote? So, for example, if somebody's in, organizations in Colorado and they have an, employee that maybe wants to live in a different state, even though the organization's in Colorado, can they say, even though this is remote, we still need you to be living in Colorado?
Yeah. Well, I'll go broad, then I'll go narrow. So, there are certain public employers, and we have a lot of members who are public employers, that say you actually need to live in the town or the county where you work. Now, they've moved away from that. That's really an option that some of our public employers have. So if somebody is working from home as a public employer and they're in a certain county, can they move? Can they move to Pennsylvania or Massachusetts or something like that? Well, that might be an issue. So that's one. Sorry about that. But then the other issue is that can they limit you? Well, you can't really tell a person where they live. But you can put stipulations on them to say, look, you need to be available for meetings at 9:00 in the morning every other Tuesday, or you need to be available for these things. So that might say, that might cool somebody as far as where they're actually going to sort of either temporarily live or can they move somewhere. So I think you have to look at, not say no, but here's our expectations. And I think the expectations really have to be clear as to what you want people, when do you want people really available? Yeah.
And as we know, people are really looking for that flexibility from an organization right now. So it becomes a little bit, can become a little bit tricky there.
Oh, sure. It's again, it's a mosaic or a tapestry here. There's opportunities, but there's things that you really need to watch as you go through this.
So a second scenario. So let's just say your employee, or we get a call that somebody's employee wants to move to the UK and work remotely. So going international now, what are some of the considerations here that an employer needs to think about?
Okay. I won't do my British impression, so
okay.
I'll watch hesitation. Yeah, this is a much bigger deal. You can move you can move to Des Moines, but moving to Dubai is a different matter. what you have to think about, here is there's big differences in what it's like to work in the UK, and even on a temporary basis. And the way I would have people think about this, Chelsea, is flip it on its head. So if we had somebody from the UK who wants to come to Denver or to Salt Lake City, Arizona, if they want to come here, what gives them the right to work here? So when they get off of the airplane, if they have their British passport, they're going to be asked a question like, Chelsea, Mark, why are you here? If they're coming to Colorado, they say, well, I'm coming to ski, and draw out in my voice as, well, I'm also here to work, but that's a whisper, or I may be silent. So when somebody says, look, I want to go to the UK, there's sort of an ethical question. Are you putting your employee in a situation where they have to tell a half-truth when they enter the country? Because they have to have the right to work there. They might say, well, for how long? Well, it's almost like the States, but it's a little longer time frame. 2 weeks, really a month, that's not going to be a problem. When you start, and every country is different. We take, the UK, it's like 60 days, and then sometimes it extends to 90 days. Every country is different. So can you be there as a working tourist? Sure, for a while, but you have to know where those limits are. But you also have to think about if you want to do it right, because this is our stealth expatriate, right? This is something you find out about these people in a stealth way. Like, do you know that Bob or Charlie or Michelle is now working in London? How long? It's like, whoa. Because the labor laws are different over there, and they are subject to labor laws in those countries. They're not subject to the labor laws here, labor laws there. The statutory rights in the UK and outside of the US are far greater than they are here in the United States. And so if you want to terminate somebody, like, do you want to do it while they're over there? If you have a downsizing, do you bring them back? So statutory rights is a big issue. Taxes, depending on how long you're there, you may owe taxes that are there. So again, somebody comes to Colorado. Do we want them to pay Colorado state tax? You bet. Do we want them to pay federal tax? You bet. So is it any different? So I think the frame of reference is just turn this situation around, because the surprises may surprise the company as well. So this is sort of implications for the employee, but you may accidentally, having that person outside of the country, create what's called a permanent establishment. And this is, you're creating a legal taxable entity by mistake. And this is like, all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, now we owe corporate taxes versus this person owing sometimes double taxes, UK taxes and US taxes. And there's all kinds of, I won't go into all the detail, but there's some interesting IRS laws there about foreign earned income tax, credits and housing credits and things like that. So here's what I'm saying is that you need to be really careful about people doing this. Again, they can do it. Should they do it? Should you allow it? Should you sponsor it? And those are big issues.
Yeah. And at what point would you have to venture into the visa world too with somebody who's a stealth expatriate?
Well, technically right away, but this is stealth.
Yes.
So can you, if somebody, sometimes these things turn from stealth to like they want to stay. They've met They're in Sweden. They've met Sven, and
they fall in love.
This happens all the time. In fact, from a numbers standpoint, I deal with 2 or 3 of these things every week. In fact, last night I got an email from one of our colleagues that she has a situation that is just this, and there's a variation on this as well that we're going to be dealing with after our time together. So there's a volume of people doing this that are sort of leaking out. So you have to be careful about it. But the visa piece, there is a really nice website that Canada has switching over to our continent. So if you want to go to Canada and you want to know whether you need a visa or not, you can go on to One Canada. There's actually just a quick check the box kind of thing, and it will tell you whether you actually need a visa to be there or not. So let me give you an example. So if you were a service technician, you were doing an installation or a break fix kind of a thing, you're going to be up there for 2 weeks. You want to go through that process, but you really don't need a visa. If you're up there for business development, you're going to be in some meetings, up there for a training, really anywhere in the world. You really don't need a work visa to do that. It really is if you're actually doing business on an ongoing basis that you're going to need really a work visa.
And related to COVID, or maybe some countries that currently have some unrest, are there some that might not be maybe safe for employees to go, or maybe they can't get back for a period of time? And what is the employer's obligation to keep those employees safe?
Well, if they're stealth, it's a bit of a moral dilemma, and I know I've mentioned that twice, but it really is. So if you're going to allow somebody to do something, you're responsible for them. There's a liability there. So if you're going to allow somebody to go to Argentina, can they get back? Will COVID prevent it? That may be an issue. But on an ongoing basis, I dealt with a company that literally sent somebody was in Argentina. There was stealth expatriate. They were there for like 8 months, 9 months, I think. And when they were coming back, they couldn't get out of Argentina. They found out about this person. I don't know how, but literally at the airports said, "You owe us taxes." And the person had to ante up.
Right then at the airport?
Right at the airport before that person got on the plane. So you have to, it's these things. It's a risk, Chelsea. It's a risk. So it's how much risk do you want to take? So it's easy to say yes because people generally have like these really cool reasons to go. But you have to be really cautious because you do have, again, a moral responsibility and a legal liability here for somebody if you're going to endorse it.
And in the spirit of, I guess, our stealth expatriate, so a little bit of a switch from that. Those are obviously people who are just, hopping to other countries, working over there. There are some actually programs that are a little bit more formal where employees can go and travel and work while they're in different countries. So I think remote year is probably like the most common that people hear, that organization.
Right.
So if an employee comes and maybe they're not, looking to move to a specific country, but they want to do an experience like that where they go and work in multiple countries for a period of time, what are some considerations there for an employer who might want to let an employee do that?
Okay. Well, remote work on their website will state, we're not a visa agency, or we don't deal with visas. So you have to watch that visa because it isn't, they're there as sort of tour guides. It's really cool. I mean, the website is really fabulous. I mean, it's wow, if you want to do this. It's great. And they move you pretty quickly from country to country. But that, I mean, you could get caught here. You could get caught. That there's that program. There are other people like that. I think Greenheart or something like that has one. There are programs for educational programs that are much more sponsored. Actually, if it's an educational thing, generally a university or an organization has those types of. They've made those arrangements. I'll say it like that. But these, like, I'm going to say whimsical types of things sound really great. There's still some liability that's there, and there's some horror stories about people that have gotten stuck.
Yes. Actually, I have a really good friend from college, and he was doing a similar program to this last year. He left in January, and he was going to be country hopping and working in various places for months at a time. And, these companies, they figure out where you're going to live. They help you, pay your rent over there. They generally help with a lot of things. And of course, COVID hit too. He left in January and COVID hit in March, and he ended up getting stuck in Lima for 60 days. They completely shut down the airports. He couldn't leave his apartment for those days. And then what had kind of happened with one of these companies is they sort of left him on his own. So he had to figure out how to pay his own rent, and ended up ultimately paying for a repatriation flight into Miami. So it ended up kind of all falling on him at the end. Of course, his organization was helpful, and when a country shuts down, there's not much you can do as to help your employees in that specific situation. So it was really tricky, and was never reimbursed from that type of from that company that he was working with. And so, yeah, there can be certainly horror stories with some of that, and not the hopefully, let's hope something like COVID doesn't happen again, but it could be any other type of situation where things get shut down and you're stuck in that country.
Yeah, I think it's just beware, and I know I've kind of repeated that. I mean, there are opportunities, and I think the general message here is that go in this whole thing with your eyes open. Understand what the risks are to your employee, to the company. Think about all the things that could possibly go wrong, and I'll mention this, though it's kind of morbid. But look, people get kidnapped. I mean, there is insurance. There is kidnap insurance. You could literally buy kidnap insurance.
As an employer, you can buy it?
Yes. You just think about medical too. If somebody's traveling, what about the medical? There's some programs called SOS. It's a company that provides medical insurance for people who are traveling. But there are parts of the world where kidnapping is kind of a cottage industry. So what do? Look, I worked for a company, and I traveled internationally quite a bit, and I literally had kidnap insurance. My premium was low because sure, I wasn't a super executive, but when I was traveling to these countries, it was like I had people meet me at the airport. I was escorted places. There were places I could not go. I was told, do not leave your hotel. Do not go into these places. So those are things that organizations don't necessarily, when they say, oh, sure, go. And there is, lastly, there's such thing as mortal remains. Isn't that a nice way of saying, if you happen to die outside of the country, how do we get your body here? Now, that's awful to think about, but in your risk assessment, I think you need to think about that. So enough of that part of it.
And so I guess also I have a question. Have you ever heard of working holiday programs? And if yes, if you could share a little bit about what those are too.
Yeah. And the working holiday programs are really more sort of student oriented. And they're generally for younger students, 18 to 30. There are some programs that may go to 35, but they are mostly, we're going to give you some sort of educational experience here. So they're not necessarily sort of work unless you want to put somebody as a developmental type of experience. You're going to give this person almost like a kind of a gap year in a sense, and we want you to go into this program, and here's a program, and they've got it all ironed out. So I think it's a viable option, but it's a planned option. So I think they're worth investigating as far as an overall development plan for a person, one of your employees.
What do you think the future of work looks like from your perspective with how the way in which a lot of people are working now, going from state to state or maybe international? Do you think that employers are going to continue to kind of demand this from an employer? And as an employer, do you think they could also maybe have a competitive advantage for allowing employees to do this?
Oh, sure. I think it's not exactly table stakes because this doesn't apply to all industries. I mentioned sort of this paradox. There are some people that literally have to be here, but for other folks, it's like, hey, you can recruit, anywhere. I don't think that even post-pandemic that's going to change. I think this has been a sea change. Versus sort of a bright, shiny object. And I think organizations really would be wise to think about this from a staffing perspective. We didn't think about it before, but really this could be a competitive advantage in getting people that would not normally be in the workforce. I work with a member that last year had 20 employees. This year they have 500. And what do? They're customer service. And they're all part-timers. And they work out of their homes. And they would have not thought of this model. But I think COVID had a way of like, oh, well, we can do this. And they equip people in the right manner. And it's allowed them to expand very, very rapidly. So it's just like 20 to 500. I mean, that's like, oh my gosh. But they were able to scale it because of this. And again, I think software companies and business management companies can do the same kind of thing. And we're all getting used to doing Zoom.
Yeah.
So that's broken down a lot of barriers there as well.
And what resources and or websites that you know of are out there and available for employers who might want to explore allowing employees to go to different states or a different country?
Well, there's the Law Alliance. Legal Law Alliance is a website that actually I use a lot. It's free, and it outlines for people sort of what are the rules of the road. It's almost like a handbook by country on major aspects of country laws. It's very, very focused on human resources. So if somebody is looking to send somebody anywhere, where it's Paris or Germany or Brazil, the Legal Law Alliance is a great place to go. We do have on our website, we do have some FYIs on this. There's some limited resources on CCH that people can access. They can certainly call us. I can talk with them. I could be a resource to members. So feel free to give me a call. But I think you want to do some investigation. And there are some of our members. I'll mention Plant Moran. They are our accounting firm. And they do a lot of international work, especially with expatriates. whether it's stealth or planned. But they have a number of nice resources on their website. So a little plug for them. And organizations like KPMG and Deloitte have a nice array of things that are free out there. So I take advantage of free, but just be leery of free as well, because free might not be as updated as you would like. The last thing is that every country has like a website for their laws. So much like we have Department of Labor, Canada has it, UK has it, countries have it. And those are great resources as well.
And then, of course, every state, too, has their own website for state regulations to get the business set up there, get signed up.
Yeah. And, for those state things, I mean, you have to get your finance department involved. I mean, they have resources that are there that are just geared to CFOs and accountants. So that's a really good resource as well.
So any final thoughts for our listener on this topic today? What do you want to leave people with on this topic?
Well, I think you want to be as proactive as you can. So you want to, I don't know that you want to create a formal policy, but I think you want to have a position. You want to have like principles by which you look at these situations, because each situation is going to be different. So if you put on a principled lens versus, an absolute policy lens, I think it's going to give you a little bit more degrees of freedom. So, I think that's important. And then then you're going to need to communicate it. So I think, sort of getting ahead of it is important. Then I would also say, gosh, I would put an agreement together where you can. Here's our agreement. Here's the terms and conditions. You want to have something there so there's an understanding. Even like, when do you call in? How does this work? How does that work? Because performance management is going to be a big deal. Mm-hmm. Because if somebody is not meeting expectations and they're in Dubai, how do you manage this? Because again, time zone, they're who knows what they're doing. So you have to think about work product. And so I think performance management and expectations about what those standards are, I think is really important. So I'd formalize that as much as you can.
And for the agreement, would you say that would be for international employees, maybe more than?
Definitely international,
States?
And I would even say you would have it for somebody who moves to another state. Mm-hmm. And my personal experience in my prior company, we had people moving out of Fort Collins to San Francisco or to Arizona and a place. I always put an agreement together, and I just thought it was I'll put it into a best practice because I was really concerned about expectations. And honestly, managers weren't all that great at managing. It's sort of good. It's good until it isn't. So I was trying to engineer in quality in that sense, and having a document with those expectations on it, and calls and equipment, and what if you leave, and how do we collect stuff, all that stuff. I think you need to be a little bit more formal about versus casual. Now, if somebody's going to go for 2 weeks, you don't need it. But I think if somebody's going to say, look, I really want to move, this is where you want to get into more of an agreement. So, 2 weeks in Nantucket isn't going to be a problem.
Yes. And one last question just on what you said too, with the principle versus policy piece. Could you give us like one little snippet of what that could look like, principle versus policy, to like help organizations, be consistent, but also be able to kind of manage situations as they come up?
Yeah, it's almost like when I say principles, it's almost, I'll equate it to sort of the values of an organization. So every organization has values. I think about them as principles because principles have behavioral implications to them. So it's almost like our position on somebody moving from or doing these temporary assignments is this. We will allow it under these conditions, that your job truly is, mobile, that you let us know ahead of time that, you're responsible for this aspect of things. So,
or what about like another a country that's safe? Like maybe you have some restrictions on countries too. That could be part of it.
Depending. Certainly. So for a state, whether it's state or whether it's an international thing, is like we don't want to put you in harm's way. Right. Look, and I know that there is a number of nonprofits that we have that send people, into very, very risky areas, but that's their deal. But you don't want to stumble into it, and because you could find yourself into, the company is at risk and the employee is at risk, and now you're scrambling. So be as proactive as you possibly can. But if you have some principles that go by, at least you can look at these things through a different lens. So hopefully that helps.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're at the end of our podcast here. So thank you so much for joining us on this topic. And yeah.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chelsea, for having me.
Thank you, Mark.